Sarcosuchus, the giant crocodile by Moth Media. I got this recommended, so we're gonna watch it, right? It's that simple. Also, please consider liking and subscribing. I appreciate it. The Sarcos and I have an interesting history. They fuck me up in Ark Survival Evolved the entire time. They just randomly appear, you never see them coming, and then you just fucking die. Ark Pain Evolved, isn't it? Huh? Yeah, that's my own experience with them. They are pretty big, so we're gonna look at this. We're gonna look at this big boy.
5 million years that spanned the Jurassic and the Cretaceous period, the dinosaurs were dominant, with no non-dinosaur land animal surpassing the size of a dog, until about 130 million years ago, where at the height of the dinosaur reign, a crocodile called Sarcosuchus first appeared that was not only a large animal, but could even rival dinosaurs in size.
Oh, was that a megatherium? Thanks. The megatherium are very important to me. They're used against the brute mother. Huh.
Out of the many specimens of Sarcosuchus that have been discovered, none of them are complete enough to tell how large they were, so size estimates have to be made based on their remains. Many estimates have placed Sarcosuchus at around 12 meters long, with a weight of 8 tons or more, which would make it the largest crocodile known to have lived. However, the methods used to come up with these estimates may be outdated. Numerous methods have been developed for the prediction of body size for extinct crocodiles from their fossils, like using the length of their skull or femur, and then using the proportions of living crocodiles as a reference. The problem is that whereas all living crocodiles are semi-aquatic, prehistoric crocodiles were actually a lot more diverse in lifestyle, and femur length to body size.
Interesting. Diverse. So, would they spend more time on land? Would they spend more time in water? How was it different? I'm curious. Right? How would they spend their time? Right? Were they more aquatic? Were they more land dwellers? I wonder. Or was it like a good mix? I wonder.
Will vary greatly dependent on how adapted to the water or land they were. Furthermore, prehistoric crocodiles are more diverse in skull shape as well, and these problems may be exaggerated with Sarcosuchus because they were actually quite distantly related to modern crocodiles, and technically weren't even true crocodiles. All living crocodilians diverged from a common ancestor in the late Cretaceous, about 80 million years ago, but Sarcosuchus diverged from them much longer ago than this, and so isn't the ancestor of any living crocodiles, and is technically just an ancient reptile that looks like a crocodile, known as a crocodilomorph.
So, So it isn't the same species. By that logic, it isn't a crocodile. It just looks like one. So, like, convergent evolution? Possibly, right? Because it probably, right? So like something that evolved alongside, like that split eventually, and evolved alongside crocodiles to look like them, something like that. Is that what? Maybe I'm confusing the term convergent, but something like that, right? Like toadscruel and tentacruel type of thing. They look the same, but they're kind of not. But they're not the same species.
A study in 2019 found that the most accurate way to estimate ancient crocodiles and overcome these difficulties is to estimate body size with their skull width. Applying this method to Sarcosuchus would bring its length down to about 9 to 10 meters. So Sarcosuchus was still a giant even with this lower estimate, stretching to almost twice the.
Oh wow, that is a big boy. That is a big boy. Look at this. That's a humongous boy.
Length of the largest currently living reptile, the saltwater crocodile, and they may have weighed as much as an elephant. Even just their skull was almost as long as a person. There are many teeth and other fragmentary remains of Sarcosuchus that have been found throughout the Sahara Desert. This is because during the mid-Cretaceous, when Sarcosuchus was at large, sea levels were much higher, which made the Sahara a tropical wetland. It would have had many rivers and lakes throughout the land, which served as a home for giant fish and a water.
So, to summarize this pretty much, right? If we wanna go that way, right? That means it How do you say this? That means it was a one and one. Basically, this animal was a one and done type of deal, right? It just happened. It didn't evolve further. Probably was wiped out, honestly. And that's that. It didn't have any descendants or anything that would like descend from it. Which is that's so interesting. How can two things, right? How can two creatures, two species look almost the same, right? And yet end up being different. That is such an interesting concept in my mind, right? That's so interesting. How can something look the same, but it just isn't the same? I always found that so interesting.
Water source for many large herbivorous dinosaurs, which would seem like the perfect habitat for a giant crocodile. There was another species of Sarcosuchus discovered in northeast Brazil as well, called Sarcosuchus harti, that was also massive, although probably slightly smaller than its African relative. This is because during the mid-Cretaceous, South America and Africa were connected, creating one large continent, and this ecosystem partially spanned both continents. The habitat of Spinosaurus would have been very similar to this ecosystem, however 20 million years later, when South America had separated from Africa. In fact, one of Spinosaurus' smaller and more ancient relatives, Suchomimus, would have lived alongside Sarcosuchus. Sarcosuchus were probably widespread in this ancient watery ecosystem since so many of their remains have been found here. Having so many large crocodiles in one ecosystem makes you wonder what they would have eaten, and it is tempting to conclude that similar to how Nile crocodiles feed on large herbivores like wildebeest and zebra, that Sarcosuchus ate the large herbivores of the time, the dinosaurs.
Well, that wouldn't be surprising, would it? Lurdosaurus. Never heard of that before. Interesting. Huh. I wonder. Again, to me it's kind of surprising, right? That obviously something of that size being like a crocodile being of this. Can we even call it a crocodile if it isn't even the crocodile? Arguably, right? It's something else. Is it even logical to refer to it as a crocodile? Right? Because while they have the same ancestors, they're not crocodiles. They just look like them. Huh. Skinwalkers. No, correction. What are they called? The ones that steal your skin?
The most common herbivorous dinosaur in this ecosystem was the elephant-sized iguanodon relative Lurdosaurus. This dinosaur was an ornithopod, so it would have been on the smaller side for a herbivorous dinosaur, and therefore a more likely candidate for Sarcosuchus' prey if it did hunt dinosaurs. Lurdosaurus has also been put forward by quite a few scientists as a possible aquatic dinosaur. It had unusual proportions for an iguanodon relative, and its hands spread out quite widely, which is seen in
I was about to say this one gives me kinda iguanodon vibes, honestly. I was about to say, wait a minute, that kinda does look like a little bit like iguanodon. Huh.
aquatic animals, so some researchers think it lived a semi-aquatic lifestyle similar to a hippo. This would have meant that it would have spent a lot of its time in close proximity to Sarcosuchus. However, this could be seen as evidence against a predator-prey relationship between these two animals. If Lurdosaurus was semi-aquatic, and large numbers of them were swimming around Sarcosuchus daily, this could indicate that they did not need to worry about being eaten by an aquatic predator too much. This could be seen with hippos. They spend a lot.
Exactly, right? I was like, wait a minute, if that were the case, right? They'd always be in fear of getting munched on, which kind of, to me, doesn't really make sense, right? Because I was about to refer to, like, yeah, hippos and the relationship that hippos and crocodiles have. Of course, probably sometimes you will likely end up with one of those getting eaten, right? Because they get in the way and then just, like, right, nom nom, gone, it's over, right? That makes sense, right? That's just logical, right? If, like, you catch, like, one alone, okay, but, like, or, like, a young one, obviously.
Of their time around Nile crocodiles because adult hippos are too big to be threatened by them. However, hippo calves are commonly fed upon by large crocodiles, and this may have been the same with Sarcosuchus. They may not have hunted adult Lurdosaurus, but would occasionally try and hunt juveniles. This part of the world also had a sauropod called Nigersaurus that was a miniature sauropod, being considerably smaller than a lot of its giant relatives.
Aww. It's basically a dino elephant. Elephantosaurus.
And may have been in the size range that a large crocodile like Sarcosuchus could have tackled. So if Sarcosuchus was a large dinosaur hunter, amazingly it would have been able to eat the sauropods in its habitat. One problem with the dinosaur eater view of Sarcosuchus is that its skull may not have been the correct shape for hunting big game, and it may have been better at hunting smaller animals. The crocodile jaw is built for high bite forces and not much else, and because of this, it has very little maneuverability other than up and down motions. And as their jaw is so long, they lack the ability to use their forelimb claws to pin their prey in place while biting chunks of meat off, like mammalian carnivores can. Because of these limitations, the way that crocodiles break apart large prey is by deploying what is called a death roll, where they bite down on a chunk of their prey and then spin their body to
Bro, imagine, right, you go somewhere along the beach, right, or somewhere, and you see this monstrous, this monstrous creature just, like, bite down somewhere and then rolling, and you can see it. That would have been a sight, bro. That would have literally, shitting, like, arguably, like, straight up just shitting your pants, wouldn't that be? Like, that would just be a sight to see. A terrifying one at that.
break it off. Crocodiles also use this to incapacitate large living prey as well, and from observing living crocodilians, it seems that this maneuver is very important to them for hunting big animals. A study in 2014 looked at models of giant extinct crocodile skulls to see if they were capable of pulling off death rolls as well. The study found that Purosaurus, a giant caiman that lived about 20 million years ago, and Dinosuchus were most likely capable of pulling off death rolls on their victims, but that Sarcosuchus wasn't. If Sarcosuchus was incapable of using death rolls against their prey, this would either reduce the size of their prey they could have hunted significantly, or meant that they hunted large animals in a different way to modern crocodiles. Adding to this, there is no actual direct evidence of Sarcosuchus eating dinosaurs. Dinosuchus was another giant Cretaceous crocodile, but lived in North America about 40 million years later than Sarcosuchus. Also, it was actually a true crocodile. Whereas Sarcosuchus belonged to a now extinct ancient lineage of crocodiles, Dinosuchus was in the alligator family, but was a giant, being around 10 meters long. Its skull was much wider and shorter than the skull of Sarcosuchus, which
Maybe a fish eater? Right? Chomping down a much larger fish? Possibly, right? I'm like considering that, right? Why not? Are there crocodiles out there that do eat just exclusively fish? I'm curious, right? Let's do a little Google search, right? On my phone here, so let's do a little Google search. Right? Does that exist? Let me see. There's a huh. Let me see. Yeah, the gharial. The only living crocodile that almost exclusively eats fish. Let me look. I mean, obviously it has a much smaller, smaller snout than whatever the Sarco got going on, but kinda has some similarity, right? It's long and thin, right? I get the vision. I get the vision, possibly.
meant that it was much better equipped to deal with the stresses that came with a death roll. Adding to this, there is actually some evidence of Dinosuchus eating dinosaurs. Bite marks have been found on the tail vertebrae of herbivorous dinosaurs from the same region as Dinosuchus that most closely resemble the teeth of the monster croc. These findings mean that it is likely that Dinosuchus was the true giant dinosaur crushing croc that Sarcosuchus is often envisioned as. Because Sarcosuchus' jaw does not seem to be that well suited for eating large animals, some scientists have argued that it may have primarily eaten fish. Its long
Bingo! That's what I was referring to. It might have actually been suited for eating large fish, right? Cause who knows? Maybe there were like large fish large enough to where such a size was like required or relevant, right? So like I could see that. I could see that. Yeah, look there. It's brought up the fish eating crocodile.
Jaw and large bullet on their nostrils is more like the piscivorous gharial than the wide and short snout of other crocodiles. Many species of crocodiles, like Nile crocodiles, that don't even have these jaw specializations, are still capable of catching fish on occasion, so Sarcosuchus surely would have been capable. Furthermore, gharials themselves are actually one of the largest species of crocodile alive today, and have a family member known as Gripposuchus that was also another giant 10-meter crocodile that lived several million years ago, and was almost certainly piscivorous like its smaller relative, which shows that giant crocodiles can definitely be supported on a fish diet. Although they were around the same length, Sarcosuchus did have a considerably larger build than Gripposuchus though, that suggests their lifestyles weren't exactly the same. The freshwater habitat that Sarcosuchus lived in had many species of giant fish like Morsonia, a 3-meter long coelacanth, and Neocratidus africanus, a 1-meter long lungfish. So maybe Sarcosuchus specialized feeding on larger fish. Or more likely, Sarcosuchus descended from fish eaters, but then evolved to eat a more generalized diet. Sarcosuchus' closest relatives, Vestasuchus and Elasuchus, both had elongated skulls with even more features that you would expect to see for a fish eater. So Sarcosuchus may have eaten a generalized diet, including fish and small dinosaurs, and just had an elongated jaw because of its ancestry. This is seen in the
See? Yeah, look at this. Right? Look at this. Right? We kind of have this, right? The Volksgarian, right? It has like... So the Garian has these 4 holds, right? They all have elongated snouts, right? They all have long snouts. But then, right, the Volksgarian has then the 6 holds, right? Just like the Sarco. There's that. The Garian. Yeah. Interesting.
modern day false gharial that looks similar to the gharial, but the snout broadens significantly towards the base, similar to Sarcosuchus. The false gharial looks like a gharial, but actually has quite a varied diet, eating fish, but also many other types of prey, including some fairly big animals like monkeys, and Sarcosuchus may have been similar, just scaled up 5 times. So these giant crocodiles would have been common in these ancient African wetlands, and probably had a varied diet consisting of fish and perhaps smaller dinosaurs, but they all disappeared around 110 million years ago. Although it isn't exactly known why Sarcosuchus went extinct, it was probably due to climate change. Although large predators lord over their ecosystems, they are usually the most reliant animal on the ecosystem being healthy, because they need such an abundance of food to survive. However, Sarcosuchus was not the last giant crocodile, as they evolved again later in the Cretaceous, and the giant croc Gripposuchus survived until as little as 10,000 years ago. Thank you so much for watching, and thanks to all my...
Not bad. Not bad at all. That's interesting. Okay. So there is an assumption that Sarco essentially is not something that eats large creatures, right? Right? And mostly large animals, right? And mostly either smaller dinosaurs and fish. That possibility is there. But I can't do a barrel roll in Ark. How dare you? I'm just traumatized, that's all. Wonderful video though. Very good, very good, very good. Thank you for watching. Please consider liking, subscribing, and I'll see you in the next one, guys. That was interesting. Send me more.